now to Kristen.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the July 9th Solid Waste Advisory Committee meeting. We're doing this virtually via Zoom. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. If you have any questions, you can enter those in the chat. All the panelists, which are all the SWAT committee members, can see the chat if they pull that up on their screen, and then we can respond in return. But from there, I will let you all take it away.
Ken, you want to open us up?
I will do that as soon as I find the right screen. Oh boy.
We figured this is our first rodeo, so we'll be patient with each other.
I had it a minute ago, so here we go. Well, for everybody, this is the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. It's July 9th, 2020, and they've taken roll. I don't have it. Why don't we have everybody go around briefly and introduce themselves if they can, and then we'll go from there.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Tom Eggleston. I'm interim manager of Solid Waste and Recycling Division and a non-voting member. And I would also note, Aaron, I just see Ashvin looks like he's in the attendee pool. So maybe you can promote him up into the panelist.
Okay, I need to figure out how to do that. Give me just a second.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop sharing so I can go back to my regular view.
It's awful when you're stuck in the, I know I can do that, just how do we do it mode, which seems to be a lot these days.
Okay, he should be promoted to panelist now.
You guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't have my camera for this computer.
It's all good. We're just doing introductions. I just introduced myself and Ken introduce himself. So other committee members, you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves too?
I'm Vinod Singh. This is my first meeting with you guys. Thanks for having me aboard. Look forward to working with y'all. I work at Far West Recycling. We process in Hillsborough and Portland, and as Tom knows, we have a metals electronics division in Tualatin.
Thanks.
And you're an industry member?
Yes, I'm an industry member.
Okay.
He was appointed in this the seat Jeff Murray was in.
Where'd Jeff go?
Jeff termed out essentially. Well, he got the board appointed Vinod in the reappointment.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll go ahead and introduce myself. This is Mike Lafferty. I'm a public member of SWAC, and I'm sitting outside in shade, but apparently my camera can't handle the brightness, so I look like the moon.
Okay, Sandra?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Good, because my laptop doesn't have its audio working, so I had the phone in, so that's me twice on there. I'm Sandra Smith. I'm a, was it public member?
Yes.
Unincorporated.
And Sue?
I'm Sue Shade. I work for Beaverton School District as a specialist, and I am a public member.
Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Folsom, and I'm a senior program coordinator with Washington County staff.
And Kathy Christie?
I think she does not have audio connection.
She does not.
Okay. And Ashvin?
Ashvin Nagaraja. I'm a public member.
Okay, now let me see. I'll go back and find the agenda. I had it up a minute ago. Here we go. Staff report.
Yeah, so some updates, some program updates from Solid Waste Recycling. It's been a while since we met, and it feels like it's been a long time since what's been happening since we met. So the last time we met, we were in person. I think it was in February, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been several months, and we've been dealing with a global pandemic since then. So lots of things have happened, but I will try to honor this 15-minute window and give an update. So I guess the first update I would give would be a kind of a general COVID update and how it's affected our staff and our program. We are going to talk about the solid waste collection system a little bit more and some impacts COVID has had there later in the agenda, so I'll kind of save some of that. So as everyone has experienced, COVID has obviously impacted our community, our workplaces, our programs. At the middle of March, the county made a decision right before the governor issued her stay-at-home order that we were going to kind of close down the building to staff and ask everyone that could to work remote. So solid waste program staff have been pretty much fully remote and since March, I think 18th or 19th. At that point, we kind of moved everyone into their homes and set them up with remote workplaces. We were one of the first programs in the county to do that fully remote, which was a great benefit to us because IT was able to help us get everyone set up. And then once the order came and everyone it was a flood of departments and programs, there was a huge backlog and there was a lot of struggles, but everyone figured it out. We've been kind of carrying on. Obviously, the working at home and not being physically distant from everybody has had a great impact to our outreach and education programs. So the outreach staff have not been able to attend events, assist businesses, and do all those kinds of things. The staff have been getting very creative. We've been creating YouTube videos and working with creating webinars on Zoom and on Teams. And they have been working with community members and volunteers to kind of promote new opportunities for outreach and engagement. We've also been working on some messaging around COVID and solid waste. Some of the key messages early on were bagging garbage to make sure that folks were bagging their waste when they put it in their roll carts. So when the collectors are picking it up, it's not blowing around and spreading around. There's a lot of concern up front. We did a lot of work with the collectors up front about PPE. There was a lot of questions and concerns about the risks of COVID from exposure from solid waste and solid waste collectors. We worked with the public health multi-agency coordinating group that is a group of public health officers from the Tri-County region that have been working on the COVID response to get some information about their assessment of the risk for collectors. They assessed it was low because of their distance from the materials, and it's really a respiratory disease that's transmitted from person to person more than anything. We've seen more information come out from OSHA, and the SWANA since then has kind of affirmed that. So it seems it's kind of stayed away from our industry, which is a good thing. I don't think we've had anyone sick in our group or any outbreaks in our industry yet. Knock on wood, that's a really good thing. So we've been working a lot. The county stood up its emergency operations center pretty early on. In the beginning, it was a scramble to kind of figure out what was going on and what role it would fill. Once they got moving along and they started really figuring out what role they were going to fill and what work they were doing, we have about 5 solid waste staff people that pretty much moved into the EOC, working mostly full-time in the emergency operations center, doing various tasks and roles and functions, anywhere from the command team to the public information team over to the business outreach and assistance. We were working with businesses to kind of get them information and about COVID and where resources are and how to talk to their customers and their employees. They were still open. So it's been an interesting ride. We're still in the middle of it. We're still in the thick of it. The EOC at the county is ramping down, which seems a little odd to a lot of people we tell that to, because they're like, well, the cases are as high as they've ever been in Washington County. But I think really if the operations center is a tool to fill a gap when there's not a function for that to be met by the county. Since we've stood up the EOC, the public health team has hired over 100 people to work in public health to do contact tracing and case investigations and epidemiology and data analysis and supporting community members that are on quarantine and isolation, and working with community-based organizations to share information and get that out there. So really what's happening is we've been in this long enough that we're starting to build capacity inside of our steady state organization. So the EOC doesn't have as much work it needs to fill the void for anymore. The EOC is still operational. It's mostly virtual at this point in time, but a lot of planning, preparing for the spring and what a vaccine distribution might look like, and how to prioritize and prepare for that kind of work. So the staff have kind of mostly starting to return back to their workplaces. Most of our team's back in. We have a couple folks working with the PIO still. So that was kind of our COVID update for how it's been working with our staff. The next one I have here, mentioned the delay in food scraps collection. It's definitely related to COVID. So we had, right before in February when we met last time, we voted on a recommendation to the board to bundle food scraps collection services with other garbage and recycling services for businesses. That agenda item was set to go to the board on March 31st. Our stay-at-home order was issued on the 23rd by the governor. So we pulled that item off the board's agenda, and we decided that it wasn't time to do this. It wasn't time to put extra stress on the haulers to start new programs and purchase new equipment. We wanted to focus on the core services, and that also meant that we were going to delay the food scraps collection mandate. So that mandate was delayed by Metro until September 30th. Initially, that was right there around the same time frame, and then they have since delayed it for a full year. So now the mandate has been officially delayed until March 31 of 2021. So it's a full 1 year behind that. So we don't anticipate bringing back the food scraps bundle rate until if things come back and we get ready to go back into the food scraps project early next year. We would probably just adopt the rate right then at that time to facilitate that program. Let's see. Metro, when we're on the topic of Metro's also been doing a lot of work lately. They were heavily impacted by COVID in the beginning, and they still are. They operate lots of venues and the zoo. They laid off 40% of their staff pretty much right in the beginning in early April. Most of those folks were not working in the solid waste side of things. They were on the venue side of the convention center and the zoo and expo center. Didn't have a totally huge impact on the solid waste team. I know they're projecting some pretty big revenue losses, and we've lost a little bit of grant revenue from them for this fiscal year that resulted in one FTE being lost in our program. So about $105,000 we lost. We're not expecting another hit for this year from that. They also cut some programs in regards to their investment innovation grant programs and their West Side Transfer Station planning. They had allocated $14 million to start moving it forward on the West Side Transfer Station in this fiscal year. And I think they've pretty much pushed that out another year to kind of free up some budget space so they can make some cuts without hitting their core programs. They're also now just starting to ramp back up on some of their work. So they're preparing a pretty major code and administrative rule update. This is going to affect us in mostly our multifamily sector. So there's some practices and some objectives of the regional waste plan that they adopted in 2018 that are to improve access to recycling in multifamily communities. So there's going to be some proposed rules for service standards for how the minimum volume of recycling and garbage collection per unit in a multifamily complex, color-coded containers, and regional signage. So there's some work happening there. I understand their draft rules are going to go out to public comment at the end of July. So we definitely will send that to the committee so you guys can see what their draft rules are. If you have any questions, you can work with us, the team here, and propose some comments. We could also ask, the committee could maybe meet later in the summer in August to talk about those rules, and if there's any questions or comments, and if the committee wants to submit anything in general to Metro, that would be another opportunity. Let's see, keep moving. So Nature's Needs, another update there. Nature's Needs was at first concerned that they were going to lose they got an investment innovation grant from Metro awarded last year for some site improvements. They were going to move to a mass bed composting system and also increase their capacity to meet their 80,000 ton cap, which planned to add about 24,000 tons a year, I think. They were a little concerned that Metro's innovation grant program cut would pull that funding from them, but Metro's honoring the already awarded grants. So they're going to continue to get that funding. They had a public meeting with the city of North Plains earlier in June to talk about the pilot project to kind of demonstrate their mass bed process. Our franchise agreement with them was set to expire on June 19th, and we didn't feel comfortable doing or proposing a full 5-year extension from that because we didn't know what the new system or process would look like. So we gave them a 1-year administrative extension. So we'll be back next spring, and that will come to the SWAC to talk about Nature's Needs and their new system and their new process and their potentially new franchise agreement with the county. And the last one I wanted to bring up, this is new and kind of breaking. I don't know much about it, but the last 2 mornings I heard it on OPB both times. There's a quarry in Washington County that goes by the name Construction Materials Recycling that recently received the 4th largest environmental fine that DEQ has ever levied, $611,000 fine. So this quarry is out in kind of rural Hillsborough, Cornelius area. and it's owned by a construction company, and they were collecting, or they were receiving glass, and some of it we think, or DQ thinks, was coming from glass to glass and other glass collection that was possibly curbside glass, is contaminated with plastics and metals. And they were grinding it on site and potentially using it as roadbed on construction projects. And they were also collecting shingles from manufacturers on site. They didn't have any of the solid waste permits. DQ seemed to be in their fine order. They looked like they documented working with them for 2 years plus to kind of get them to come into the fold and get some permits, and they couldn't do that, and they kept processing their materials, so they hit them with a really big fine. So I know the fine's been appealed. We'll see where it goes. I think it's a pretty big issue. There's some community members that are neighbors of that facility now that are putting pressure on the county to kind of do what it can to make sure that the county is helping DQ manage that facility in terms of that potential violation there. There's some pretty big fine that DQ hit them with, and there was some pretty scary findings in their fine order about microplastics and groundwater contamination and all kinds of stuff. So we'll see how that plays out, but I think it's going to be an interesting process with DQ's enforcement structure there. So that's really what I got. I think I kept it close to 15 minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions up front if there's anything on that, but don't want to take too much time from the agenda. Looks like you're muted, Ken.
Here we go.
Yeah.
What is the name of the company that has the landfill?
The quarry, you mean, that they just got fined?
Yes.
I think Construction Materials Recycling, I think, is the name.
And do you know who the construction company is underneath it?
I'm not sure. I think it could be connected to Kerr Contractors, because there was a Kerr name on the ownership in the warning letters that came from DQ.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me. Kerr and Kerr McGee have a wonderful, rich history that would fill a novel if we wanted. So go ahead.
Yeah, any other questions? All right, I think that's it for my update. Ken, do you want to look at the next item there on the agenda?
We just had Dean ask, why did DEQ take 2 years to enforce? Dean Camper with Waste Management.
That's a question for DQ, Mr. Dean Camford. So I would ask DQ that, please. We just recently found out about it, so.
I'm
Go ahead, Mike.
To me, it's interesting that you just recently found out about it.
Yeah, it was interesting to us too.
Why wouldn't they not start?
And that you heard about it over OPB of all places. We should be having a presentation now, and let me see. Solid waste collection systems update and rate review findings.
All right.
Again, that's you, Tom.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to try to do a screen share here for everybody. Bear with me for a second.
I think we should make sure no one wanted to comment in the 2 minute, they still could. Just want to make sure that we're not leaving anyone out.
Was there any other comments? We can put them in the chat from the panel attendees. So can you guys see my slideshow?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. See if it works. All right. So solid waste collection system update and rate review findings. So we'll go through this slideshow to give you all an update on how the solid waste collection system is doing and what the 2020 rate review findings were for this year. So quick overview of the purpose of this update is mainly to provide an informational update on the status of the solid waste collection system during the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2020 rate review findings. So there's no action items today for the committee. We're just giving you an update on what things are doing and how they're going and what the findings were from the 2020 rate review. You might have noticed that we didn't have a meeting in June to do rates this year, and we'll give you a little more information about what transpired between March and now. So let's talk about rate review. the typical rate review process here on the left side. Every year we do receive financial reports from the haulers that are due in the middle of March. After we get those financial reports on March 15th, we review the prior calendar year's financial data. So we're looking at data from 2019 to evaluate the costs and expenses and revenues that the collection system experienced to kind of identify how they did in terms of a return on revenue. Based on that data, we work with the haulers and our consulting firm, Marina and Company, CPA firm, to create, land or develop a return on revenue. And that is, Kathy is, can you give me the formula, Kathy?
It's profit divided by revenue.
Profit divided by revenue. And that
Yes.
is a percent of profit that they made on the revenue collected, correct? Yes. So we land on a return on revenue, our income. And historically, that is where the committee would come in, where the county would come out and say, okay, our target has historically been 10%, and the return on revenue was 8%. So we think that there needs to be a rate increase for these lines of service. So what does the committee agree with those recommendations? So that's normally where that process comes into play. So we create these recommendations and make these adjustments based on those findings. And then we bring them to your committee for review and recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, whether or not you agree with staff on that recommendation. The board takes action on the recommendation. They either accept staff's recommendation or they ask us to bring back a different package. And then the new rates usually become effective on July 1st of the year. So they would become effective on July 1st, 2020 if we had a rate package come this year. So as you might imagine, 2020 rate review process was different than has been historically. We had a global pandemic in the middle of it. We did collect financial reports. They came in that middle of March. We continued to work with our CPA firm to do site visits and due diligence. They did most of that remotely through tools like Zoom and their other tools available to them. So they were able to review the data. They were able to do some prudency tests and do some adjustments and determine a return on revenue. And then we had COVID-19. So that really paused the process. We did not go past that. We didn't make recommendations for the committee. We didn't take recommendations to the board, and we didn't move any further. So we kind of just paused, hit the brakes on what was going on, and took a breath to kind of see where we were at and see what the status was with COVID. So it definitely interrupted our process. So the findings for 2020, and this kind of wraps up into one of the reasons we didn't feel that it was a prudent move to come forward with any recommendations for rate adjustments. So the system collected revenue, again, this is from 2019 numbers, about nearly $32 million for the collection system. And the income was about 3.1 million. So we ended up with a 9.81% return on revenue. If you remember from past years, there's been a 10% has been a target for the last couple of years. So staff felt that, and the board felt that 9.8% was close enough to 10 during a pandemic that we didn't think it was prudent to come forward and raise rates on customers that were already experiencing financial hardship. We do acknowledge that this data is 2019 data, so this is a very different snapshot than what it is today and what the haulers experienced in the spring. But the rate review process we have in place is not the mechanism we would use to evaluate the current impacts of a crisis. So you might remember the recycling market crash. We took some interim action and put a rate surcharge on the garbage bills to help compensate the haulers for those extra costs. And that wasn't managed through the normal rate review processes either. So this was a special circumstance, and we didn't feel that 9.81% was too far off of 10 and that it didn't warrant any action going forward. So looking down at the lines of service as well, residential came in at 10.04, commercial 8.91, Dropbox 9.95 for a total system composite of 9.81. So kind of moving on to what has been happening with the collection system from the COVID impacts and what the COVID response has been. One thing we did early on, we got a request from one of the collection providers that said, hey, if you let us collect waste materials outside of the normal hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., we are pretty sure that we can limit any interruptions in service. This was really early on. We were worried about folks getting sick and absenteeism and all kinds of stuff. That didn't come to fruition, so no one needed to take advantage of that. We did lift those restrictions so they could have more flexibility on when they collected, but from what I hear, what was actually experienced was more staff were available because vacations were canceled, and folks felt an honor and a duty to continue showing up for work and continue doing the job and the essential service that the community needed. So the haulers, the drivers stepped up, and they continued to show up, and they continued to get out there and collect waste in the community. So that didn't come to pass, and we're happy for that. Another thing we did kind of early on is we put a pause on bulky waste collection. So a lot of the haulers do collect bulky waste from residences. So we agreed that collecting bulky waste that requires 2 people to come close contact with each other and pick up a couch or a bed or a mattress or whatever it is, did not make sense during a pandemic when we're asking people to stay 6 feet apart from each other. So we allowed the haulers to put a pause on collecting the bulky waste materials that require 2 people to pick up. We did ask them to continue to pick up extra garbage bags outside of the carts, because a lot more waste is being generated in the residential sector, and there's a lot of extras being set out. So everyone's at home generating garbage and quarantining. Another thing that the Washington County Hauler Association agreed to do, they early on agreed that they were going to pause service terminations. So they agreed that because of the impacts COVID was having on community members and unemployment and business closures, that we would put a pause and hit the brakes on any service terminations. So for folks that are experiencing economic loss from the pandemic, and they're getting an arrears on their garbage bills, they are not having their service shut off at this time. We are continuing to work with the haulers on what it looks like to bring this back, and how does it look, when do we start service collections, processes, and terminations again. We're still having those discussions, and so there'll be more to come there on that. Another thing we did kind of try to do throughout and early on is we tried to help share information. We shared information about PPE we mentioned earlier, and safety, and worked with a regional group, with regional solid waste groups. So Gresham and Portland and Beaverton and Clackamas and Metro, and kind of convened a call once a week to talk about the issues and the challenges that were coming up, develop strategies and solutions, and share those, kind of trying to be a consistent across the region and what our response was going to be. And then another thing we did in regards to the rates process, working with the Washington County Hauler Association, we wanted to make sure that we acknowledged the situation of COVID was having and the financial impacts that it was having on their immediate financials and not their 2019 financials. So we agreed to a framework that we would carry out through 2020, and that framework included delaying the typical 2020 rate review. Come on, sorry, my son wants to hear me. So we would delay the typical 2020 rate review action. So that was an agreement we made with the Washington County Hauler Association, that we would put a pause on that because it wasn't the right time. The return on revenue came in pretty healthy. We would also start tracking monthly operational data. So we developed a data tracking tool that we use to look at tonnage, revenues in past due accounts, all these kinds of metrics for different impacts that the COVID might be having on the system. And we start tracking that monthly so we can move into kind of understanding what's happening with the impacts from the pandemic. We also agreed that we would take another look in the fall of 2020 at the financial health of the system. So we would be monitoring these metrics through our monthly tracking tools, and we would work with the Hauler Association to kind of understand what impact was having, and if it was really hitting them hard on their bottom line and their cash flow, that we would work with them in the fall of 2020 to kind of get a better understanding if there was a required for any interim rate action or any interim action that was needed to make sure the system was healthy. Excuse me. And then finally, we also signaled that the county would be willing to consider urgent requests for financial assistance. There was some fear up front that there would be some cash flow issues potentially. So we wanted to make sure that the haulers in our system understood that we did consider them an essential service, and that we were not willing to let anyone go out of business if that's in the position they were in, and that we needed to be ready to work together to make sure that didn't happen, because not getting the waste collected in the community was not an option. So we sent that out there too. So that's the 4-point framework we developed. We're still working through it. We're working on collecting the monthly tracking data and working on collecting that monthly tracking data and getting ready to kind of understand what we might be looking at into the fall. So a quick overview on, go ahead, Ken.
Tom, before you go on, in your monthly analysis or somewhere, is somebody looking back and seeing what impact the pausing service terminations is having? Is that like 1% of your normal monthly revenue, or is it a bigger number that would cause some concern?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we're trying to figure that out. We're looking at information about past due balances that they're being carried, trying to compare that to the average from 2019. So that's kind of the proxy we're using right now to evaluate and judge the impact that's having. The data is pretty difficult. It's pretty all over the place, and it's kind of difficult to understand. So we're trying to get a good understanding of what it's telling us. So we are trying to keep an eye on it and try to understand what impact it is really happening. We are also, along that same thread, this is brand new and we haven't got anywhere with it yet. We're looking at if there's any options for working with any emergency relief funding to understand if there's a kind of a relief valve that we can set up for community members that truly can't pay their bills. So if there's, like an energy assistance program model that could be replicated for the solid waste system. So we're kind of exploring these options to really think about the full circle, how we're going to deal with this issue as it drags on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So what's the early data showing for us? It's interesting. The commercial tonnage data, you can see that line that goes straight across it is just the average tonnage collected by the haulers in 2019 per month. So it's pretty flat there. And then you can see in 2020, the actual tonnage took a big hit in April. And that's, I think, to be expected. The stay-at-home orders were issued at the end of March. So April was definitely the biggest hit on that year. We did see a pretty big bounce back in May of 2020. So we're not really sure where that's going or where that came from yet. I don't think that many businesses just jumped back on the service wagon in May. So we're trying to understand what that is. We don't have the June data yet because it's due at the 15th of each month. So next week we should be receiving data from June so we can kind of see if the commercial tonnage, how that's tracking. Residential tonnage is interesting. You can see the average line again, and then you can see that we've actually had a pretty significant increase in residential tonnage collected by the system. And I guess it makes sense because everybody's at home, everybody's generating more garbage. I know my household is putting out more garbage than it ever has. And there's a lot of extras too. We asked if they could document how many extras were being set out, and we've seen a significant increase in extra set outs as well. So this doesn't necessarily mean that they get more, that the haulers are getting more revenue from this tonnage. Many of these carts are probably just extra full or stamped down or extra heavy. And that actually could be costing the system more money as those disposal costs are going up because they're disposing by weight, and the volume isn't really necessarily going up at the curb. It's just getting heavier and more packed in there. So that's another thing to kind of keep an eye on. So what is this telling us? I don't know if it's telling us much yet. I think what it is telling us that the situation remains fluid. The current trends are really not showing a super significant impact. We are acknowledging it's still very early. We don't know where the commercial is going to go, what it's going to look like, what the economy is going to do over the next couple months. Residential is an interesting trend, and I don't know if that's going to keep going up or where that's going to go. Another thing that is, excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry. The beauties of a home office, right? It's the most popular place in town. Another thing that is, I think, worth noting is that we have seen significantly lower fuel prices across the sector. So there is some relief on the cost side of the equation too. And there's been some government relief programs out there, the Paycheck Protection Program that hopefully some of our companies were able to take advantage of, and some other economic assistance programs, expanded unemployment benefits for community members that are paying bills and doing those kinds of things. We do know that a lot of those programs are set to sunset here at the end of July. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we get through into the later summer and into the fall and what kind of impacts that has. We're still watching and we're going to still keep track of it, and we're going to kind of try to keep on top of it. Another thing we've noticed, which is nice, is, sorry. Sorry. Another thing we've noticed is there's been a lot of gratitude in the community towards the collection community, collection companies, drivers, haulers. Lots of cute images that we've seen from neighborhoods about with kids putting chalk drawings on the sidewalks and saying thank you to their haulers. And I think collection, the garbage truck coming down the road at 6:30 in the morning is a normal that everyone is starting to appreciate, maybe a little bit more than we had for the last couple years, decades. It's an essential service that serves the community, and we need people out there working in collecting the solid waste. We generate a lot of garbage, and these folks and these companies are diligently taking it out of our households and taking care of it for us. So there's been a lot of appreciation out there. I know I've heard a lot of stories about drivers noticing an uptick in waves and smiles and thumbs up. So I think that's a nice story that's coming out of this as well. So finally, I'll kind of close with the same thing I opened with. Really the purpose of this event, this update, I'm sorry, is to provide kind of the informational update and the status of the system, give you guys the results of the 2020 rate review and an overview of what has been happening in response to the COVID-19 situation. So I'd be happy to take any questions, answer any of those, and I will escape out of this, and I think I'll come back. I'll stop sharing my screen. Sorry, back in the matrix here. Is my screen stop sharing? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
All right, so I'd happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm gonna mute myself between answering so you don't have to hear children arguing with each other in the background.
Well, since nobody else is talking, I'm going to comment that I think all of us, or certainly most of us, have raised kids, and I think yours are doing just fine. So, not to worry.
Yeah, we have a lot of that at Intel right now. Kids and dogs and construction in the background of meetings. So it's kind of the new normal.
New coworkers, right? That's
And
what
it
we're calling
sort
them.
of kind of brings the humanity
Yeah.
of all of us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so any questions on that, we're happy to answer them. And if you have any questions going forward,
I guess
let
we
us know.
don't have Beth on.
No, we don't.
So my question probably would be more for Beth. I'll just throw it out there, I guess, to get it on the record. Would just be like, what's the pulse of the haulers, right? How are they doing? How are they feeling? What's going on? But without her here, I don't really know that. Maybe you can speak to it a little bit, Thomas, but.
Yeah, I think generally, we've gone to the Hauler Association meetings and via Zoom, and for the last couple of months, the chair of the board, Chair Harrington, went to one of the meetings with us and thanked the haulers for the work they're doing. I think generally I get the sense from them that they're continuing to carry on and things are going. Obviously, they're feeling the impacts. We're not really sure what it's going to do yet. I think there's a sense of uncertainty about where it's going to go and how long it's going to go on for. So I think that's the biggest concern, is just not knowing what's coming and how long it's going to drag on for. And Vinod may be able to give us some insight.
Yeah, I don't really want to speak for anybody particularly, but I think it's that uncertainty. So it happened so quickly, and then the commercial, the schools shut down, the businesses shut down, and so there was this. Well, okay, well, now what's going to happen with all these? Meanwhile, the residential side, like you said, was picking up and getting busier. So I think it was there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's still, we're still having to stop again, kind of the economy getting going. So I think there's some concerns with that as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of uncertainty everywhere right now with what's going on with this, with the current uptick in cases, and the county is considering phase 2, and when is that, and do we know when that's going to be, and is this trajectory going to level off, or how are we going to keep going? I see Dean put a comment in the
I see that, and I responded. And then my next question actually would have been for Vinod. Little off, it's not rate review, but how is this affecting you guys out there at Far West? Are you
So
getting, yeah,
yeah, so sort of the same thing. We you know, the commercial tonnage went down, the residential went up, but not to the same extent that the commercial went down. Um, so we saw that. You know, within our walls, we had pretty good sanitation and PPE practices in place already. So we had the gloves and masks. So we had to do a little distancing of some of our operators and sort line people. So there was that changes and you know, kind of that, you know, what's the uh, transmission rate, and what's that coming from? So we really followed CDC and all the available information. But we're still working through it, and we're hoping that you know, it's we'll figure out what the new normal is, and then you know, there's things we do more sanitation around that building now. We wipe the handles down, and so we kept working through it all. We just had to kind of amplify things we were already doing.
yeah, and I was, and that's all good. I was kind of, the first thing you said was the commercial tonnage went down, the residential hasn't really brought it back up. So it sounds like it's a net loss for you guys as far as profitability and whatnot.
Yeah, it hurts, and then you know, we're in a spot where we trade commodities, so we're also at the, you know, as the value went up. You know, things like office paper, initially the value went up because we had no toilet paper, and then you know, cardboard's kind of, it fluctuates with the packaging and the, you know, the increased e-commerce, the packaging, Amazon boxes and things. So it has been a negative overall on us, but it's you know, sort of been tempered. We're same thing. We're just trying to get through it the best way we can.
Got it. Thanks, Vinod.
This is Sue Shade. I guess I just want to step in here and really compliment all of the haulers for Beaverton School District, because they have been more than accommodating to what our schools have needed since March. They've terminated service, they've reduced service at a number of schools. They've just gone above and beyond. So all of the haulers, we've got 4, Garbarino, Pride, Walker, and Waste Management. They have all been outstanding. And I just think I really want to thank them for that. It's awesome.
Thanks, Sue. Any other questions, comments? No? All right. We can move on.
Oh, phooey.
Right.
Well, I've lost the agenda again. Let me find it again. Let's see.
I'm next.
You're next? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's the Solid Waste Advisory Committee bylaws. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes. I mean, it's up.
Before I get started, I just wanted, just on a personal note, to say how much just this little bit of normal, seeing you all and seeing all your names and hearing from you has elevated my mental health status. So I just wanted to thank you all for attending. Much appreciated. But now I'll get started. Erin's going to be driving my presentation for me, so I'll just tell her next slide when needed. So good evening. I'm here tonight to discuss the Solid Waste Advisory Committee bylaw update project. It kicks off the development of an ordinance to revise Washington County Codes 804 and 808 as they pertain to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. We haven't yet developed any new code language or bylaws. This is just the beginning of the process. After a lot of discussion and input, we plan on developing any changes in collaboration with all of the various stakeholders. Okay, next, please. Next slide. So how did this come about? Well, back on February 25th, 2020, the Washington County Board of Commissioners adopted Resolution and Order 20-30, which you probably have seen is often referred to as the Equity Resolution. It reflects the board's commitment to structuring our organization to model services, practices, and engagement approaches that equitably meets the needs of all residents. Next slide. Next, thanks. So I thought I'd start with sort of what's the policy question around sort of this project. And basically, we want to align the Solid Waste Advisory Committee with Resolution and Order 2030 to equitably meet the needs of all residents, all community members in Washington County, particularly those that have been underrepresented or underserved. Next slide. So what do we have? I previously sent you all the current bylaws that reflect what's in code. The bylaws haven't been changed since 2012, and the code, large sections of it, have been there since 1969. So there's, they're pretty broad, and they haven't had much change, but currently, you know, the representation, we have 6 members from the public, 1 HHS staff member that doesn't vote, and 3 industry members. It covers basic things like how to appoint, when, you know, meeting schedules, quorum definitions, some basic duties, although when I reviewed it, it's not very specific. And then the disposal code, which is 808, is really not specific. It just speaks to duties related to solid waste disposal topics. So there's a lot of room for change if we think that there's a need. All right, next slide. So I thought I'd ask the question, what does it mean to incorporate equity? And for us, it sort of starts with the board's Resolution and Order 2030. It gives a lot of direction. Some examples that we might want to consider for membership would be positions that represented or had intentional representation and for communities of color, for garbage and recycling customer classes such as multifamily or commercial, volunteers, maybe a master recycler, a representative from the aging community or the disability community. And then along with that, there's a consideration that maybe if we had shorter terms or we had term limits, there would be offered more opportunity to serve on the committee. Next slide. So here's sort of the kinds of questions we'd like to get feedback on. So in terms of, and we also plan on asking these same kinds of questions with some of the other stakeholders this summer, but it's, you know, who do you think should advise the board? What communities should be represented on the committee? And how might we engage communities that aren't currently represented? Next slide. Some other things we're thinking about, as I mentioned before, should we create term limits or in conjunction with shorter terms or one or the other? One thing we thought about, what if we add additional members now? You know, we expand the membership, but then the question that arises from that is how big is too big for a committee? Right now there's 9 voting members plus a non-voting member. And should we have more concern about unincorporated community members or a majority that are unincorporated community members? since you're weighing in on matters that are often specific to the unincorporated jurisdiction. Next slide.
Oh, Kathy,
Uh-huh.
have we identified specific non-represented communities? Who would we be reaching out to bring in?
So my very last slide talks about some of the communities we're going to be engaging with.
Okay, great.
We're pretty open right now. I mean, this truly is the very start of this project. So we didn't want to sort of have a preconceived kind of predetermined outcome. So we're leaving it pretty open. I mean, we're going to engage with sort of the community engagement group here at the county. We're going to do a lot of kind of outreach to try and you know, interest other groups. You know, part of it is selling the pluses of being on the committee, or what the committee does, or how serving on the committee helps community members within unincorporated Washington County. Sort of all the things that most likely brought you all to applying to join the committee. So we do have a kind of a loose timeline. It started with on May 12th, we brought the proposal to the board during a work session, and that was followed with the board authorizing county council to file an ordinance to revise chapters 804 and 808. Following that, over the next couple months, we plan on working with various stakeholders and drafting the bylaws. And then we'll most likely come back to the committee, as well as engage our leadership on sort of what we think is a good proposal. So there'll be further opportunity to comment and weigh in and provide input. And then in late September, early October, we plan on having an ordinance, working with county council, having an ordinance prepared that would end up having to go to the board, because the board has, in order to change the code, you have to have an ordinance. And then that would change the code, and the code is what provides the mechanisms for us to make changes to the bylaws themselves. So that's just kind of a very loose timeline, but we don't want to, I think it's important to put milestones so that it doesn't just keep going and going and going. We need to keep ourselves on track. So that's the intention of this. And then another slide, please, Erin. Thank you. And so our next steps is we'd like to develop a survey, working with some of the educators that are on staff, and some feedback tools. We intend to engage stakeholders through a variety of channels, including chambers, social media outreach, also community partner engagement, maybe listening groups with some existing groups, such as the promotorists and the master recyclers and civic leaders. Next slide. So that's just kind of a very, very broad outline of the sort of the reasons behind this and our intention with this. I want to make sure that you all have plenty of opportunity to provide input, to engage in the process, because I think you're a great resource that will help inform me as to kind of what you see as working well, isn't working well, how you think we could more closely align our membership with sort of the goals that the county has set. And so I know it's kind of hard in this format, but I want you to feel free if you think of something or you have an idea, you can shoot me an email. That's perfectly fine, and in fact would be really helpful. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions
Thanks, Kathy. And I would like to add maybe a little bit to context. Sorry, Kathy, can you mute so I don't get the feedback on your mic? We got the question kind of early on when we were talking about this is what's broken or what's wrong? What are we fixing? I don't think the answer is that there's anything broken with this group or this committee or that there's something that needs to be fixed here. I think we're on a journey as organizations and as public sector agencies to kind of understand why our communities of color and our other marginalized communities have been so negatively impacted by the systems that are in place. And part of that is just looking at what structures we have in place and what systems we have in place and why they were created the way they were. And how could we think about adjusting things to make it more intentional, to purposely include people in discussions that haven't been included in discussions in the past, to purposely make sure that we're actually understanding and asking ourselves the questions of who's impacted by our decisions, and are we including those folks in the conversations so that they can help weigh in on the decision-making process they're being impacted by. It's not that you all aren't impacted by your decisions. You certainly are impacted by your decisions. But I think a really good example for this committee is our code gives us a charter that says we want 6 public members and they serve the interest of the public. There's nothing that says they need to live in any part of the community or any of that. I think Sandra is the only one right on the committee right now that actually lives in unincorporated Washington County. And so we're, as a group of people, making the decision on rates for people that live in unincorporated Washington County. So we have a committee of 9 people, and there's one person here that actually is voting on something that is going to impact their own personal interests. So that is something that's to consider. It doesn't mean that everybody has to be from unincorporated, but I think it makes sense that we think about what is the outcomes of our actions and our decisions. And when we make a recommendation to the board as the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, they take that to heart. They really look at that, and they don't disagree with that recommendation unless they really, really disagree with it. In that sense, they can, but they usually do and listen to their committees and understand what they're saying. So they're asking us, hey, if you're gonna bring these committees together and you want them to make recommendations to us, how do we know that you're including those that haven't been included in the past? How do we be more intentional about who we're asking for representation? And I think part of that is not necessarily just us as individuals, but it's more about the positions we hold in this committee. So if we designate a position that actually serves as a business account holder, that person could be Sue Shade. She's a business account holder. She works for a business that holds garbage accounts, and she could actually then, in that sense, she's empowered to make decisions based on the interests of her employer and her business. Right now, we're asking her to think about herself as a community member, as just a general public. That's where you think about someone that lives in a multifamily complex. If we're making rules and decisions about garbage service for multifamily complexes, we should probably have somebody sitting on a committee making a recommendation to the board that lives in one of those settings that would be impacted by the decision that we're making. Communities of color is another one that we have some folks on our committees, we have some diversity, but we're not asking anybody to represent their communities. That's a big ask, and that's not fair to put that on people unless we intentionally create that space and we recruit for that. We want to make sure that we're being honest and intentional about it. So I think it's not about any of us individually, and I want to make sure that no one sees it that way. It's more about more opportunity for voices that haven't been at the table to be heard, and for the board to feel confident that we are engaging the community and that their committees are giving them an honest interpretation that is intentional and evaluates those that are making decisions that impact them and that is in their best interests. And so we just want to think about that. And I know it's kind of a weird exercise. Kathy and I were talking about this. It's like, let's ask a committee how it could change its own bylaws that might make some of its members not sit on the committee anymore, like term limits. Some of us have been on the committee for a long time. I know Ken and Mike have been here for a while. And if we say, okay, we're no more than 2 term limits, that means you're disqualifying yourself from the committee. But that's something we need to really think about. And what does it mean to have limits or shorter terms? And what is the outcome and the result of that? More people can come cycle through and make recommendations and decisions. So that also means that the committee doesn't have as much institutional knowledge, and it has to be taught and trained more about what the system looks like and how to make an informed decision. So there's pros and cons on all of these things. And I think, like Kathy emphasized, we're really just starting this conversation. We want to start with you folks because you guys have been on this committee for a long time and you understand what it does and what its purpose it serves. So I think this is the most important group for us to start this engagement with.
Okay, Tom. Um, I could be on this committee for 30 years and not bring a tenth of the background or institutional knowledge that Jeff had. I mean, Jeff literally grew up as a hauler. And so when I had a question about how did we get here, he was always able to really explain it well of, you know, what happened 30 years ago or 20 years ago that resulted in this being the policy and the conventional wisdom moving forward. And I'm saddened that we lost that. And not saying anything about Ashevin, but I just think that institutional knowledge is worth a lot, and not having it is sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ken. Jeff had a lot of, he served a lot. He brought some great insight to these
Well,
conversations.
it seemed to be his passion. And you could always ask him to come and be a participant from the, you know, maybe not a voting member, but he could still add a lot of value if you just reached out and said, hey, can you still come to these meetings? It's up to him. I don't know. I have some comments on the thing overall. I guess number one, as a public member, it's not a glory ride to be on this committee. It's good. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, but it's not like there's some great intrinsic. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It just, to me, it's a service. It's something I'm doing to help the community, and I feel like it's a way to give back. Right. That's why I do it. Term limits are probably good. They're good in almost every other form of government. They're probably good here too. I'm glad Sandra's on. I've said for a couple of years, why don't we have more people who are actually from the community we're overseeing? So I would lean towards the committee should be made up of, the public members should be a majority of folks that are in unincorporated Washington County, you know, going forward. As far as of color, you know, that kind of goes to what I was just saying about, well, who lives in Washington or unincorporated Washington County? I don't really have a good feel for the demographic of unincorporated Washington County, but if it is 50% Hispanic, yeah, then you should think through that. Now, do you bylaw that? Do you say the committee needs to represent what the community looks like? I don't know if you could write that into bylaws or should, but it should be intentionally thought through. Like the point you were making, Thomas, about if you live in a multi-dwelling, but yeah, it's a good thing, right, to think through. Now, when I think of unincorporated Washington County, I think of a bunch of homes out off of big driveways, which could be a complete bias of mine. I don't know. I don't think of multi-dwelling residencies, but maybe there are a lot. I don't even know. Just the fact that I don't really know the demographic, single homes versus multi-dwelling versus business versus, you know, the different people of color in unincorporated Washington County probably says something, right? I should probably know that or understand that better as a person on this committee. So, I mean, those are just some of my initial thoughts on all this.
One of the things we're looking at, you make a really good point, Mike, that do you put it in bylaws or how do you do that? Well, we are looking at some of the other advisory committees. There's actually a lot of different versions in the county and some of them have already sort of gone through some of this exercise. Some of them actually wrote it pretty prescriptively in their bylaws in terms of what their membership should look like. Others have not, so that's a really good consideration. And it's not you shall have, you know, X. It's more of, if your community you're serving is proportionately this, you should, you know, it's less specific than that, but it still gives a nod to intentionally having an opportunity for underrepresented community members to serve on the committees.
Yeah, usually the way I've seen it in other committees at the county is they'll have 1 or 2 positions. You don't necessarily create a quota. I know that's the, 50%, communities of color, we 50% members. It doesn't work like that. It's really, you create an intentional position that is recruited for, that says this position is intended to represent, communities of color in Washington County. So in that sense, that recruitment is the tool to select. The person self-selects up to that, says, yes, I feel like I'm in a position to do that, or I feel empowered to do that, or I work for an agency or an organization that serves that community, so I understand that what their issues and challenges are, and what their interests might be. So I feel like I'm empowered to represent that as a voice on a committee. So that's kind of the mechanism I think that would be used to do that. We have community-based organizations like Centro Cultural and Adelante Mujeres that serve the Latino community in Washington County, and those, we're working a lot with those agencies on some of our outreach programs, and that would be the perfect kind of place. Someone that works there, or someone that is involved in that, or someone that sits on that board, is the type of person that knows and understands the community and what they're dealing with and the struggles are, so that they can bring that voice to this committee. And I think that's kind of the idea and the intent of those kinds of carving out those groups and those interests in terms of what those people can represent. Ken's coworker's got a fuzzy tail.
Yes, she does. She'll come back into the picture in just a minute. Here, come here. Stand up here and look at these people so they can see. This is Sasha.
She's cute.
Thank you though, Mike. That was really nice to hear you thinking that through and talk about it. I'd be happy to hear any other thoughts anybody else has, and it's a good conversation.
I'm only recently not in unincorporated county, since last March. And up until then, I was in the totally urban area between Beaverton and Hillsborough. And I served on the Reedville School Board for years and everything, but it was all unincorporated Washington County.
Mm-hmm.
It is totally different than the people who live down by Shoals or down by Midway. All the people we fly over as we go in and out of Twin Oaks. And they're all people in unincorporated Washington County. In terms of land mass, you've got this vast area with actually few people in it in comparison with the clustered people that have not been sucked into one city or another in the process. And so we're hardly a monolithic population.
Yeah. Unincorporated Washington County is really interesting. We have over 250,000 community members that live in urban unincorporated Washington County. If urban unincorporated Washington County was a city, it'd be the second biggest city in the state of Oregon. So it's a lot of people. North of 26, Bethany, Aloha, those are all urban unincorporated areas that there's a lot of people that live there, and it's a large community. Bernard, you live in unincorporated, yeah? Yeah. So now we have
two.
Sue? Yeah, see, we don't even know this. This is the point.
I always thought Sue lived in Beaverton.
I did too.
We talk so much about Beaverton, Sue. I thought that's where you lived.
I work there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Live in Portland.
And I think it's interesting because I was involved in the period when the high school district and all the elementary districts, which in historically Hillsborough had elementary districts separate from the high school district, and the state mandated that they merge. And suddenly we were the second largest district in the state behind Salem Kaiser. I mean, it was amazing because we were this little tiny district and suddenly we were huge.
Well, let me throw a really radical idea at you. Talk about self-terminating. And this would self-terminate you guys. What if you said, hey, for purposes of trash collection, we're not going to really think about it as unincorporated Washington County. We're going to look at these areas. We're going to say, well, if they were in a city or if they were in an area, this is who they'd be served by, and they're just going to get the rates of, Hillsborough or Aloha. I mean, could it be drawn up in such a way that you don't really have, from a trash collection perspective, an unincorporated Washington County? You utilize, because you already have all the haulers and they already have rates for other places. Could it be done such that you don't have to have this infrastructure?
Presumably, City of North Plains, for example, adopts their code says we're going to do whatever Washington County does. So they don't, we approve rates in the board, and the city of North Plains residents rates are changed along with Washington County's.
That's, I think,
So it's essentially the same
opposite of
thing.
what
It's
I
just
was,
the
yeah,
opposite
but
of what
yeah,
you're saying, but
yeah.
it's essentially the same thing. I mean, I think fundamentally it would be, you know, you're putting people, community into a position to not have a voice over the decisions that are made over their service areas and their community. So
Oh,
I lived in Aloha,
how do
and
people in Hillsborough, that's where I live, have
Yeah.
a voice? And I'm not saying this is wrong. I don't know. How do people in Hillsborough have a voice over the rate in Hillsborough? Is there such a way to do that?
they don't have an advisory committee, but it does go to their council every time they do a
It's a
rate
city
adjustment.
council thing?
City council thing.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have an established committee that makes recommendations to their council, but they do go through that public council process, and there's opportunities for folks that are in the know or know what's happening, essentially, to go talk about it with their council.
I think the other thing to think about would be sort of our rulemaking process. We haven't had one in front of you folks in a while, but that's directly a function of the code that only applies to unincorporated. Our regulatory boundary stops at the cities. So all of those rules, since we don't have franchise agreements, would still, and those oftentimes beyond the financial issues that are associated with rates, the administrative rules really may impact community members, because it's determining what level of service you get and when is it picked up and how early can they come, and just a lot of different items. So I would just keep that in mind. I mean, we could, you know, rate setting is one piece of what, kind of what you all weigh in on, but
There's a lot of rules, and yeah, I'm not saying what I proposed was like
no.
easy or natural. Just it was something to think about.
And we honestly hear that a lot, the other way around. We'll have, why can't we just do whatever you do? And so,
Be careful what you ask for, right?
yeah, exactly.
So I'm kind of going back to, oh, was there somebody?
We're still waiting for food scrap collection over here.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
I can give you a little bit on that, but I guess going back to the questions Kathy kind of posed to us, I have them in front of me here, and one of the things was, I think this is kind of what we're talking about right now, is who do you think should be advising the board on solid waste issues? And so I think we've been talking about that. One of the other ones was how do we engage communities that are not currently represented, and that's not necessarily means engaging those communities just for the purposes of getting them to serve on the committee or asking them to serve on the committee, but in general, how do we further engage community members that live in multifamily complexes and that are, you know, represent communities of color and these other interest groups. And the aging population is another one that comes to my mind. It's got a, you know, garbage service is different for folks in that represent the aging population. So I think just being intentional about that is another thing to think about.
Yeah, and I'll weigh in here a little bit too. And this could be, I mean, a lot of this is, I'm sure a lot of what I'm saying is my bias, right? We all have our biases, but you know, when I first got on this committee, it was during the middle of the day. And I finally got to the point where I said, I really can't keep doing this if it's in the middle of the day. So we made it, you know, in the afternoons, which is much more convenient. But the idea of somebody in a multifamily unit, they're probably in a different socioeconomic place, right? And the idea of having them have to give up their time, they may work shift work. I mean, it may not, the pool of who you're pulling from could be a lot smaller, and you're asking a lot of folks when they come on the committee. There's a lot to be intimidated by when you first step into the committee. A lot of times Brad's there, you got legal people, you got hauler people, you got to have business sense, you got to have government sense. It's not like, it took me like 2 years to kind of wrap my head around it all, right? And I think you need to be sensitive to what you're asking folks to do also, right? It's not like a simple thing just to walk into and deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we've talked about too is if we do ask like what you're asking, pointing out, Mike, if we're asking people to serve on this committee, we have to probably spend more time working with folks to understand the purpose of the committee. We have to do more education. We probably need to meet more regularly. Maybe we need to meet not necessarily at the government building in Hillsborough every time. This is a new platform. Maybe we can do more of these. Maybe we can move around where we meet. Maybe people that are in struggling financially need to be compensated for their time. That's another approach.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Time's
And
money.
I did hear the Chair Harrington speak to that very topic. She fully recognizes that if you expect people to take time off work or drive to the public services building, we should keep that in mind, that it can be an economic hardship.
Childcare, another issue.
Childcare, exactly. And
I think Metro does a little bit of that, right?
What's it?
I think Metro does a little bit of that.
Yeah, Metro's doing some of that.
They
They're
do.
starting to do that.
So I don't think there's well, I think there's models that we can look at to see how we could get there. It's not tabula rasa.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
And Tom and I are trying to, now that I've sort of taken on this role and it's given me some leeway, I'm trying to gradually get more and more engaged with you all. So hence the reasons for giving you the update emails and the what did we do at the board last week and all of that kind of information. And I think more and more of that will, I hope, help new members, because we'll, maybe we need to reinstitute orientations again. There's a lot of things that are responsibility of staff as well. It's not, I recognize fully that this is it can be intimidating, and it's also, I'm taking your time, so it should be valuable. So we're thinking of a lot of things that are sort of more broad than just membership and bylaw changes. So I hope that, I'm open to, suggestions, definitely.
Another thing I think we haven't done historically with this committee, which other committees do in the county, and I know Metro's new Regional Waste Advisory Committee does this, is bringing the committee along in the process of developing new rules and codes and policy as well. So historically, this committee's been managed in the way that we have something that's baked and it comes here and you react to it and you share that reaction with the board of commissioners, and that's kind of the role that's played here. But if we're working on updating rules or a shift or a food scraps collection program, there's lots of opportunity for touch points for this committee like this to say, hey, I think we should look at this, or we're going along this path, and we kind of bring this iterative process along. And so the committee can kind of help grow and shape the formation of these things. And so it's just a different management model. And you're right, Mike, a lot of it comes on us as staff to be able to give the time to this committee, to commit to this committee, to involve it and to listen to it and allow it to be involved in our processes and our systems. And I think that's what our intent is too. We want to create a sounding board that we feel that can help us make decisions better than we can make on our own, and that you guys can react to and give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down on, because that's not necessarily always there's not necessarily a binary choice.
Yeah, ultimately, I look at it as, I think a lot of times you guys get wrapped up in, process and the haulers and making it all work. And I feel like sometimes the actual people who use the servants are almost thought of, third. And I come from a different perspective where I'm always just dealing with customers, and customer obsession is like our key thing we always talk about. And so I actually think if you're going to try to change the committee and the committee layout, I would get more public members, if you can, who are in unincorporated. So I'm not saying keep it the same size and just swap out unincorporated with, well, what I'm saying is I would make the committee bigger, right? Because I think you're going to have a harder time coming up with a quorum when you have a bunch of new folks. All the things we just talked about, people's time and effort and energy. I would increase the size of the committee, keep the quorum amount the same. The public or the industry members will be pretty solid, but then your public members, it gives them a little more leeway. Like for me, I'm always, when you put out the email that we're having it, and then who's going to be there, I'm thinking about that quorum and I'm trying to make sure, okay, if I can be there, I want to be there. I don't know that, new batch of folks are going to take it as serious. So if you have maybe more of a pool in the committee, that could help you with meeting your quorum. So I would just get more customer feedback in the committee versus less.
Absolutely.
As a new person, I do take it seriously, but it really helps to have, I think, Ken and Mike around, because I spend so much of my time learning that most of my time is listening and kind of still figuring things out. I got a lot of help from Teresa. She used to like phone me and we would discuss these things ahead of time. And so I think that orientation process helps a lot, but still having that experience, and I think Mike and Ken put the words better than I do most of the time just because they have that experience. So I would be a little bit concerned with term limits, just because when you don't have that experience, it makes it much harder to learn. There's a lot of history in this team and in the haulers and all of that. So I definitely look like a newbie, and I ask Beth questions and I have no idea what she's talking about. So it really helps to have the smart questions being asked by the.
One of the lessons that has become abundantly clear is that while we change our membership, the haulers don't really much. In the whole time I've been here, they've had one change of representative, and they brought somebody else in who's a real professional too. So there was no real loss of continuity for them. And the haulers are very well represented in terms of discussion with the individual county commissioners. We have the potential of being an adversary because they really do have the ear. It's called a checkbook, and they all contribute to the commissioners. It's just the political reality. If you're going to run a business that's regulated by the county commissioners, you're going to contribute to the candidates, probably all the candidates, both sides. But I've noticed along the way that they are involved in discussions with the commissioners outside of discussions with SWAC, and especially Charlie was, and so it was. It's not a balanced kind of thing. The haulers are well represented, both in the SWAC committee and in the political environment, the whole political scene, and there's not the level of community involvement. One of the really discouraging things about being on a school board was that there was not much community interest, and it was a core group of people that were there, and 80% of the people, we used to joke about it, if that big yellow school bus came and took them away and brought them back later in the day having been fed, they're happy. They don't have to be educated, they just have to be fed. And it was sad. But
yeah, I think
anyway.
Ken more bluntly said what I was kind of getting at is just get more feedback from people who are actually affected by these decisions.
And I want to compliment Teresa and her team, because they have done a great job of outreach to the public community and get people who are really interested in this. I'm awed by the involvement of the public members and their background. That we have a pretty good team right now. So.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned earlier, you noted on the time we used to meet, 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursdays. And that was great for staff because we were at the office.
Yeah, you're there.
It
was very convenient for you.
And part of that challenge was that we would put out an announcement about the committee and the vacancy, and we would get 0 applications. I mean, we moved the time to 6 p.m. and we would get 5, 6 for almost every one of the recruitments following that. So it's just, it's another great example of the fact that just creating access and opportunity and making it easier and removing some of the barriers that people face when trying to engage in a process like this.
Yeah, even if this this Zoom functionality can be used more often, even when we're not in a COVID world.
Absolutely.
It does reduce a lot of barriers.
Yeah, I worry about that we don't come to the places of interest that we're trying to reach. I mean, just the public services government building can be a barrier just in and of itself. So, if there are other ways,
Yeah,
doing
parking. You
yeah, all
gotta
of
get the
those,
parking pass.
all of those things. Plus, but on the other hand, Zoom meetings assume technology, and there's considerations. So it kind of gets back to Tom's pros and cons. So that's why discussions like this are really good, because it's just stream of consciousness of all the different sort of
But you
things
could
we should be
also
thinking about.
also write into your bylaws just the need to do a annual or semi-annual survey of the community, right? Get actual feedback versus it's just happenstance. But if you actually codified it, that hey, every year we're
I
gonna
like
get
it.
some feedback.
That would be like a rule change or something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea too, Mike. Even for this process, we're thinking about a survey just because it's an easier way sometimes to reach people that you don't even know how to reach, but through some of the community engagement folks that are out there. But we think this is all really important, but Tom and I were talking and we're like, how do you sell it? I mean, sometimes it's a sales job and the way you get around that is sort of bringing information about why it's of value.
How do you sell what? How to get somebody on the committee?
Yeah.
Interest. Like you're saying, it's a burden, and we're asking a lot
Exactly.
from you. So how do we share? What's the value that you see, and how do we share that value with potential people that serve on the committee?
So I think you all are great voices about that, and I may come along and ask you more directly for sort of some feedback. But until I worked for the county, I didn't know what a solid waste advisory committee was. I had no idea. None. And
half the time.
Well, Kathy, I called to complain about my hauler, and it took me a while to find out who in the county you could call and complain about the absolutely rotten service I was getting. And Teresa, who clearly had her ear to the ground, listened to my sad tale, and then wanted to know what other kinds of things I'd done. And when she heard I'd been on the school board and chaired the school board for years, boy, she wouldn't let go. And so I've been here ever since. But I think that it's all happenstance that people, and I'm sure some people come in because they're interested in the topic and what have you. But I think some of us just sort of stumbled in and got lassoed. So there we are.
Yeah, and let me say this about your name. Sometimes I'll tell people why, because trash or something get brought up in conversation. I'll say, well, I'm on the solid waste advisory, and they'll look at me and they go, oh, solid waste, right? Just most people in their mind when they hear solid waste,
the poop factory.
Exactly. They're like, what do you do?
Exactly.
You should change the name.
We call ourselves garbage and recycling on our website. So
well, that would be a better committee to be on.
Yeah, I found out about this committee through the Master Recycler not a web page, but our monthly newsletter. Even though I've been a Master Recycler for like 20 some years now, I'm kind of out of it. I just happened to look at that. It's like, hey, this looks fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. We just started doing those kinds of announcements on Facebook and on the Master Recycler website. So that's how you saw that that was right when we started. I think you're the first one to come through one of those channels.
Has it been fun?
I wish we could meet more and we could do more things, but I didn't know anything about these advisory committees, and after I became on this board or this committee, I learned about Tualatin Parks and Recreation. They have a bunch of committees. The city of Beaverton has a bunch of committees. I went last year to the city of Beaverton, had like this open house thing, and they had a pile of committees, and most of them you had to be a Beaverton resident, and since I wasn't, they said, well, you can't be on our committee. But there was one, the bicycle committee, and I was like, I really wanted to be on that, but they met the exact same second Thursday of every month.
Mm.
So I wrote to the lady and said, I can't be on your committee because I'm already on a committee and that meets the exact same day of the month. So, oh well. But, and also, if you
Thank
guys
you for
didn't, if you
choosing
didn't
ours.
talk or later, there's no way I would even be on here because I'm not going to miss work. I can't miss work that much to come to one of these and go all the way out to Hillsborough and back to work. It wouldn't happen.
Yep. Thanks, Sandra. Anybody else have any thoughts, feedback, suggestions, ideas? Any places where you think we were talking about even talking with the chambers of commerce, because we don't necessarily talk with business interest other than the solid waste industry business. And I know Sue, because she's a resource conservation coordinator at the school district, oftentimes is thinking about what this decision might mean for the school district, but that's kind of by accident and it's not necessarily intentional. So I think, it's another thing that could be thought about as a business as a customer, not a business as the business that we're making, we're regulating here. So more about what is a business customer thinking about in these decision-making processes.
But that would be something, Thomas, that, the business group that goes and does outreach to the business community through Washington County, they would be a good resource to try to find potential.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think that what I've been thinking about through this whole discussion over the years, sometimes it's been very difficult, like you said, Tom, to get committee members. So maybe having staggered kind of terms would be a good thing for committee members that we have.
Yep.
Build a broader base with staggered terms. Might be a good idea.
Tom, reach out to Rick Van Beveren. He's on the city council for Hillsborough.
Yeah.
And he owns the Reedville, Tavern.
Catering.
And he's been very active in the community all his career, and he's turned the restaurant over to his son, who actually on the day-to-day running it. I doubt he'll ever back out of the picture completely, but he's not running it the way he used to. So, but he's very community-minded and interested. And in talking about other communities that are not represented, and we're going into food scraps, I'm sure they would have real thoughts on the subject and be a real resource.
Yeah. We've actually worked with Rick on the technical assistance team and at Reedville.
Oh,
and part of that was, I think, part of his trying to see what this program is all about, because Hillsborough is making decisions about food scraps. So he's called us up for technical assistance.
Well, that's the kind of guy he is. He does his homework, and I've been impressed with him. He was very helpful in the school district and was always available to help out with functions and what have you.
Cool. Any other discussion, questions?
We clearly don't have anybody signed up for communication, unless I don't think we have anybody still participating. So
we have 2 attendees, so if they want to say something in the chat or ask to be a question, we could let them ask that now.
We have Dean and who? Do you know who else?
Looks like Kristen Leichner. Pride Disposal.
Pride Disposal, right. Well, if either of them have anything they would like to contribute, I'm certainly open to it.
Give you guys a couple seconds, Dean or Kristen, to put something in the chat if you have anything. Watch it. Nothing for me. Thanks for the contributions to the committee, says Kristen. Thanks, Kristen. All right. I think that's it. Do you want to close us out, Ken?
Yep, we'll adjourn now. Would somebody want to move to adjourn, and we'll adjourn?
Adjourn.
Okay. We're adjourned.
We're adjourned, Ken.
Yeah. You can all go home now.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you all.
We'll keep in touch with you all about next month. I think we would probably consider having another conversation next month about, continuing this conversation. Maybe we can share some things we've learned between now and then with you all, and then also kind of see where things are going with everything else COVID related and all that good
And
stuff.
we're also thinking about topical presentations too, to kind of, even if we don't have action items. So if you have anything that you're interested in, let me know.
I think you got to take a couple stabs at writing committee membership. Yeah, what you think it could look like. Give a few examples.
Like draft some example bylaw
Yeah.
categories.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we could bounce around the pros and cons of them.
Okay, we can do that. We can bring some of that back next time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank
Thank
you,
you all.
everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
guys.
the conversation.
Bye.
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 In closing, this meeting will be recorded. We will be posting it to our website within 1 week.